Yeah, and it is really easy to make things brown. And when I say brown, I mean overly neutral. There's too much neutrality in it. So if it's starting to look that way, don't be afraid to, move from brown to some identifiable color, because that's all brown is. It's just a warm neutral color. So if you want it to, there's no reason why you can't cool it or warm it up and still stay in the realm of brown, but just give it a little bit more hue, more identifiable hue. Because otherwise, unless you like brown, brown's okay. But like a variety of browns and temperature too. So I have like warmer browns and cooler browns. Just some interplay, as long as it doesn't look flat. So mixed a new dark, and I'm just kind of going over some of these trees yet again. Little phthalo green, cad lemon, titanium white, just to bring the intensity down, which is it's a dark, sort of pale green. Kind of cutting back into that dark at the base. Putting some blues in there, kind of along the ground, off in the distance a bit. Phthalo blue making an appearance. I don't think I've used that yet. And phthalo blue is good. I like using phthalo blue when I feel like ultramarines everywhere. It just kind of gives a new blue option. And again, you have to be really careful with it because it does really influence your colors. But I like having that alternate blue to use that isn't as purple as ultramarine is. And so there's parts on here on this painting that I've hardly done anything to, like up at the top where it's right there on the edge. I've done minimal work on that. Same thing with like the little offshoots there in the upper left. Those are a couple neglected areas, but they're sitting back and they're kind of doing their job. And so in my mind, if they're not screaming for attention, then I'm going to leave them be. So now I'm just kind of putting some color in. I'm putting a little bit of rim light on a couple of those trees just to create that, some of the light in the sky is falling on the objects, that they have some roundness to them. Just darkening the base of this tree a little bit. I really like that color, the ultramarine blue and cadmium with a little touch of white makes a really nice color. So this one here is a little bit redder. And putting that in the surrounding area to capture some of that flame color in some of the distant objects a little bit. It's radiating light a little bit. And I'm just reshaping some areas of sky where the sky meets. Finding a couple edges. Warming it up a little bit. Overdid it, so I have to go back in with the dark. Overdid the dark, so I had to blot it out. So hard to see, but just putting in these little punches of cool notes on some of these thinner trees. I'm doing like the offshoots, the branches and the twigs and things for the smaller. Just a general dark, neutral, cool color. Adding the tree. This one's a little redder. So just from that tree color, just modifying it, and then I can use it in the foreground. It's darker and it's redder, so it's going to be up closer. Put a few cooler notes in the ground, cool it off just a little bit. Distant trees. And then you're also shaping the closer trees by contrast. And that's a good technique, like for drawing really thin with kind of a big brush, is you put, a line down and then you paint into that line on either side and you can get a really thin line, modeling it that way. So just carving into it, you can create a really super thin line, hairline. A little bit more here in the foreground. Trying to keep my darkest darks up close to that bottom edge. So even though, it looks like the trees are very dark, if I were to put that same color note that I just mixed up next to any of those dark trees, it would stand out very clearly. And just refining some of my stuff in there. So I'm painting in a core shadow on this log. It's not quite dark enough. So I want basically a stripe of dark that goes down the length of the log to show that it's, it's in fire and it's bathed in light, but the backside is facing the dark and it is much darker than that in actuality. And then I can use that same color note and put in a couple other key branches and logs and just kind of refine the bottom area. Softening edges. Also, too, it's a good idea to, um, take breaks and look at different things other than your palette and your painting, just to like reset your eyeballs. Because if you keep looking at the same colors, then you start to become desensitized. So you have to get up, see new things, go outside, take a look at something brighter or darker or different from what you're looking at. Because otherwise, you're just going to get used to it and you're going to kind of fall into like this kind of a fog in a way. So you want to stay sharp and keep your senses finely tuned. So breaks are good. Reset your rods and cones, which is hard to do because if you feel like you're on a roll, like you're just absolutely killing it, the last thing you want to do is walk away from it because it's like, well, if I leave, the magic is gone. But if you did it once, you can do it again, right? And that's what some of the pauses are in this video. They're edits. So I did take several breaks throughout. So I'm just kind of narrowing at this point. This is, definitely the third stage of the painting. I'm just making minor slight adjustments throughout because it's basically, where I need it to be. And that's that's kind of how I approach it is you want everything to be correct in each stage. And by correct, I mean where you ultimately want it to be. So you want to get your stage one, all those values and approximate color notes in the correct place where they're ultimately going to be. And so I just like to think about it in terms of you should have all three paintings. And we're actually going to do this next week when we start talking about sunsets and landscapes somewhat. I have 4 different stages of a sunset, and each stage, should look very close to the previous one. And if you hold them off at a distance, they should look basically identical. The only thing that differs is, the amount of detail and the amount of variety and some of these other things. So if you're doing that, I find that my best paintings, if I'm doing that, then they're holding that through each stage. They're consistently good in that sense. But sometimes, you start off with one and it's just a bear and you're just struggling the entire time. And then you pull it out at the very end and you're like, how did that happen? That's a pretty good feeling because it makes it all worth it. It makes the struggle worth it. And then some, they don't materialize. It's like not so good. So, but I found that, I told this early on, but I just enjoy the process of doing it. And so if you can enjoy the process, then, it's a huge advantage because you want to do it more. And you do it more, you get better. Better meaning closer to your vision. And that's always the struggle, is wanting to communicate something visually and not knowing how to or not being able to. And so the more fluent you become in the language of painting, the more rewarding it is because you can suddenly say what you want to say. So my thinking with this color is I'm just trying to put hints of light that's peeking through these little separations between the stones. So it's just kind of radiating out along that ground plane. which does happen. And it doesn't take much. And that's one of those things that you could easily overdo, and it becomes its own like attention grabbing feature to the painting. But that just takes away from the focal point or the purpose of the painting. Those are just accessories that are lesser important, but still, kind of fun to see. But you just don't want to make them about, make the painting about them. So you have to like fight yourself about things like that. Like the things we want to overdo, we should probably underdo for the sake of, the quality of the overall design. I become enamored by like the tricks in painting, and you kind of want to show it off, and you want to be able to do it and say, look, I can do it. And that has a place, but not at the expense of everything else, like I said. So we are nearing completion. I can feel it. So now I'm going back up to the top just a little bit. So this is, that's a pretty dark orange. And it's it's lighter in value than the sky, but it's not too far off. And so the contrast there is, hue, obviously, sky is closer to blue and the flame is obviously orange, but also, temperature. So you have the hue contrasting and you have the temperature contrasting, and the value is relatively close. So it's contrast by value, or contrast by hue, contrast by temperature. And I like that it's high contrast at the base, and then it kind of softens as it climbs. And it's still contrasting, just not as stark. So it's just a matter of degrees, really. And so now I'm kind of painting wisps of flames kind of curling around the bottom side. So as that fire is burning oxygen, it's wrapping around. And I didn't want to go overboard with that. I just wanted to imply it, because then you lose the structure of the darkness of the log and it starts to become pretty unclear.